Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our Webbula webinar. My name is Tammy Kaufman, and I will be your moderator today. I am a lead generation specialist here at Webbula. I've been in marketing many years, and so when we first started talking about this, I had a lot of questions myself from my own experience, and we thought it would be a good idea to do this webinar because most likely all of you have questions as well. So as we're going through this webinar, if you find you have a question you would like to ask, please type it into the chat and we will get to those at the very end. We do want to keep this to a 30-minute webinar, so we'll do a hard stop at 12:30, but we'll try to get to as many questions as possible in that time frame. So let's start off. I first want to introduce our speaker, Tim Hartley. Many of you may know Tim as he's been with Webbula for many years. He is Webbula's Vice President of Business Development and leads our team of talented professionals here, all of whom I can say are very passionate about solving our clients' email and data challenges. Tim's been in the industry now for nearly 10 years, so he gets it. He has a deep understanding of the market trends, what marketers' needs are, and can give really great insight into best practices. So welcome, Tim, and thank you for taking part in this webinar today.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today as we dive into this exciting new realm of email and what Gmail or Google is throwing at us, purging some emails. So to kind of kick it off, I know a big question that everyone already has is what is the Gmail purge? Well, what ended up happening is Google has been looking at their entire data set, and they've decided for a lot of reasons, but mainly for security reasons, they want to delete old inactive email accounts. As we all know, Gmail is the largest uh, email provider in the entire world. The average user has 1.7 Gmail addresses, which is kind of wild when you think about it, because the average person has 2.2 emails. So when you look at that, it's a very close, narrow margin between what the average user has versus how many of those emails are comprised just of Gmail, which kind of reflects the next stat that we have up, that Gmail owns about 76% of the market share just in the US alone. And then 90% of all US startups are all backed by Gmail. So because of this, Gmail has just taken a look at the whole infrastructure from a security standpoint, but then also when you look at how many emails that are out there that are not even being used, this is weighing heavily also on their infrastructure, and they need to do this purge to also free up resources on their end as well. I'll just take a pause there. Any questions that you all may have about that? Anything else you'd like for me to elaborate on? I'd love to take questions on that I could answer there as we get to the end.
All right, so we'll, feel free to type in your questions. We'll get to those at the end. So Tim, can you elaborate on this a little bit as to why this is important for marketers to pay attention to? As a marketer myself for many years, I used email verification to check my list, and I used to think that that was good enough for my list. As long as the email was valid, it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Tammy. So, as we all know, when it comes to just verifying the email, it's a great first step of identifying whether or not the email will deliver. But as I'm sure a lot of you have already come to realize or already know, simple verification just isn't enough because it's not going to detect things like fraud threats or reputation threats such as spam traps or bots or malicious emails, because all of these types of emails, they wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't come back or report back as invalid. So they are valid emails, they will deliver, and many of them will even click and open and give you false metrics that would allow you to continue to send to them. But in reality, by not identifying these types of threats, you're really going to hurt your sender and brand score, and you're just going to diminish your returns on your investment. And then ultimately, you could wind up on a block list.
One of the things that I found so fascinating about what Webula offers is what you refer to as email intelligence, because
Mhm.
it's so much deeper than just the verification. Could you explain a little bit about what email intelligence is and help our viewers understand that a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So email intelligence is actually understanding how active or engaged that email address is with you as an organization or a company. So as we all know, every marketer, you all do a great job of making sure that you're engaging with an audience who is up to date. They're clicking, they're opening. Uh, but separate from that, how is an email address as a whole interacting with the email ecosystem? With Webbula's email intelligence activity, you can identify that and understand what that email address is doing from on a monthly or quarterly basis. You can actually see activity over multiple time frames. You can filter this to your certain specifications and then identify which emails that you may want to purge. What you're able to do is if you are getting email or sending emails to Sally Smith and Sally's really engaged, she's clicking and she's opening your emails, that's awesome. But what happens when Sally's not really engaged? She's not clicking and opening your emails. Would it be helpful to know that, yeah, I know Sally's email is delivering, but is even Sally checking her inbox at all? Well, with our email activity intelligence, you're able to do that and gain a better understanding of the user behind that email.
And just to clarify, Tim,
Yeah.
so what you're seeing on the screen is kind of similar to what you would get back in a report from Webula,
Mhm.
but you actually get filterable results as well that you can kind of build your own parameters around, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's three different columns that Webula will actually identify to let you know how engaged an email is. So the three columns are the first seen, meaning how recent has that email address been seen by Webula. So this gives you an understanding of potentially the age of that email address. Has it been created in the last 30 days, or is it a year or older? This way, you know if someone's potentially just using that email address to sign up to fill out a web form to take advantage of an offer, or maybe they're just using it to get access to a white paper, or maybe it really is just a new email address that someone created, and that's fine. But it just helps you understand the longevity of that email address so you know what to expect from it potentially moving forward. The second column is what we call the activity trajectory. This way you can identify on a 6-month rolling basis how engaged this email address has been within the email ecosystem. Have they been clicking? Have they been opening? And is it trending up or trending down, or has it pretty much stayed the same over the last 6 months? And then the third and final column is what we call most recent activity. How engaged has this email been? Has it been clicking? Has it been opening? Has it been filling out web forms in the last 30, 90, 180 days? Or has it been a year or longer since any activity of this kind has been seen? And the power behind it by these different filters on these three different columns is that you can now assess and judge metrics that you have or you already know on the email, and you can overlay that data to either confirm or deny assumptions or anything that you know about that email address. So going back to Sally, again, you can now identify that, okay, yeah, Sally's been super engaged with us, but we haven't really seen, or Webula hasn't really seen Sally very engaged in the email ecosystem that much in the last 90 days. Well, that's a positive for you because now you have a really engaged consumer that really loves your brand. That when you email to Sally, she clicks, she opens, she may buy something, and that's awesome. Conversely, it could be the other way. It could be that now, Sally, you've emailed to, she hasn't opened a single email in 90 days, and you overlay that data, and now Webula, we're telling you that we haven't seen any activity in 90 days or maybe 180 days. Now you can confirm that, okay, Sally's not just ignoring emails from us, she's ignoring emails from everyone. So maybe we should probably move her to a suppression file and no longer email Sally in the future because her emails are delivering, but most likely she's not going to
Yeah, and you could actually then do re-engagement campaigns if you wanted to, and
Yeah,
maybe get her re-involved. And then even with Gmail, you could use this information to kind of maybe anticipate emails that could be possibly purged as well.
exactly. So yeah, as we come up on the purge date, which just going back to that, they are going to begin purging in December of this year, and what they're going to start with is with emails that were initially created, but there was no activity sent. So you're going to see a lot of those active emails that were created initially, maybe for uh, an initial web form fill where they were wanting to download that coupon or that white paper, and then after that they got it, they never opened the actual email address ever again. So that's where Gmail is going to start. And then moving forward, what they're actually going to do is being reaching out to those email accounts. And then if there's a secondary uh, email address that's associated with that account, they're going to be emailing that as well, saying, hey, we're going to be shutting off this email. So what you can do with this email intelligence is go ahead and start making those assumptions as to how active that email address actually is, and go ahead and start putting them on your suppressor before they actually get deactivated.
Awesome. So the big question we all get asked as marketers is, how's this going to affect our ROI and hopefully improve the ROI?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and I love answering this one. Uh, as we all know, bigger doesn't always mean better. So when you're sending out to a list, you want it to be super engaged. Marketers, you all work very hard. You want to build the best list. You want to segment it properly. You want to set up your DMARC, your DKIM, your SPF. You do a great job with your content, your subject lines. But when you have bad data, it's all for nothing. So we always encourage and let people know that, hey, having a smaller list isn't a bad thing, because what ends up happening is when you have a lower list and a smaller list, you're going to have lower sending costs, and you're going to also be able to segment and target your customer base by your highly active and engaged users. So now when you're marketing to them, ISPs are going to recognize that you're emailing to good email addresses, and they're going to set priority for you to actually be delivered to the inbox, versus sending back the response, yes, you were delivered. But in reality, you weren't actually delivered to the inbox. You were delivered to a spam folder, or maybe you were delivered to the trash folder or something like that. You weren't actually delivered to the inbox. So your ROI is going to go up by removing these types of threats, moving inactive emails, engaging with an audience that really wants to hear from you, segmenting those properly.
Great. And I think, sometimes it takes a little bit of educating on our part to help our teams understand, that bigger isn't always better. And that can sometimes be a challenging concept, especially for some of our C-suite
Yeah,
execs.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. Because when you're looking at it, and you know, you think, okay, I have a million emails, or 10,000, or 100 million, whatever your company size and list size is, it's great because you worked really hard to get there. But that doesn't mean that every email you ever created or captured is still good. So you don't need to always email them every single time you do a campaign. Really prudent that you segment these lists, that you remove inactives, really do a great job of cleaning them up. Because ultimately, what that ends up doing is you're going to increase your sender score and your brand reputation. So, like I said before, ISPs are going to prioritize you and actually give you the ranking that you want and that you need in the inboxes for your users, and not move you to spam. And it'll also be less likely that when a user gets an email address from you, that they're going to mark you as spam, because they're going to say, hey, I know I signed up to get emails from XYZ company. They're doing a good job of sending me content that I want to hear about. This is great. And they're not going to hit that spam button on you and complain.
perfect. Now, let's hone in a little bit on Webula. Tim, can you tell us what's different about Webula's data?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, just to kind of start off, what a lot of people may or may not know, Webbula, we started off as an email service provider. So we used to send emails on behalf of our clients. We would do the rigorous job of putting in the work, creating that content, make the great subject lines. We'd set up the DMARC, the DKIM. We would do all of that for our clients. But what would happen is clients would give us the list and they'd say, hey, it's a clean list, it's double opted in, everything that they thought would be good. But when we would hit that send button, everything would blow up at our face. We would hit spam traps, we would hit invalids, we'd hit complainers, malicious moles, all of these really type of nefarious threats that are deliverable, but they're not good emails that you would want to send to. So we realized very early on that we needed to develop a technology to help marketers identify these types of threats before they hit the send button. So that's what we did. And we walked away from sending emails. So we don't send email today. We just now focus on helping marketers and companies identify good and bad emails so that you can segment your list properly and identify them. And because of that, what we were able to do is gain an exclusive partnership with the world's largest honeypot purveyor. It allows us to identify these types of honeypots that no one else can. Unless you send to them, kind of defeats the purpose because what you really want to do is identify that before you send to it. Because as a marketer, you all do a great job of getting people to opt in, get these emails the proper way. But ultimately, as we all know, good things happen to bad things happen to good people. So unfortunately, you just end up getting bad emails in your list and you don't know it because they're clicking and they're opening. So we take pride in being able to identify these for our clients. Webbula is also very big on your data being your data. It's not ours. So we do not store, cache, cross-sell, or cross-reference your data between clients or even between separate files that one client will send to us. We keep everything siloed because we want to maintain the integrity of that data set. So we ensure that it stays encapsulated within its own silo. And then that way you're able to pull that out, identify the good and the bad emails, and then segment accordingly based on the flags and categories that we identify. And then lastly, all of our data, it's deterministic self-reported data, meaning it comes directly from the consumer and it's tagged at the individual level, meaning we don't model anything. And we also ensure that we keep everything from a data integrity standpoint in line with one another, meaning we see Sally Smith at Main Street. We want to make sure that Sally Smith at 123 Main Street, that all that data belongs to Sally and not belongs to someone else. And then the last part with that is when we're talking about data quality, WhoSet, who is an independent data auditor, has rated us #1 or being in the top within over 80% of different categories. So that just speaks volumes to the quality and integrity of Webbula's commitment to truth and data, and that's what we're all about.
Perfect. Finally, last question is, how can our audience get started?
Yeah, it's a great question. Feel free to visit our website. We'd love to have you fill out a form, get started there. Myself or any one of our team members would be happy to work with you. Or if you'd like to work with me directly, I'd love to chat with you and have that conversation. Feel free to email me at ehartley@webbula.com. We will offer a free test for anyone that was a part of this webinar that is viewing today or in the future, up to 10,000 emails, depending on your list size. And we'll provide you back the results in full so that you can understand not only the results of your individual list, but then gain an understanding of the in-depth analysis that Webbula is able to provide so that you can make the best judgment call on how to move forward with your list.
Great. So at this point, we are going to open it up to some questions. If you do have any questions, if you want to put them into the chat, we'll try to get to as many as possible. The first, I want to kind of start it off with a little bit about sender reputation. So say, Tim, you're somebody who has sent it out and you're just not sure, you feel like you might have damaged your sender reputation. Like how, how does that work and what can you do?
I'm sorry, Tammy, could you say that again? You cut out there.
Oh, sorry. The first question I would have would be, can you talk a little bit about sender reputation? And if you do
Oh yeah.
feel that your sender reputation has been damaged, what can you do about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So two parts to that is consider your sender reputation or your brand reputation, like your credit score or your domain or the IP addresses that you're mailing. So when they get damaged, which can be done through sending the malicious emails or threatening types of emails, spam traps or bots, when you send to those, it lowers your sender score. And when your sender score gets too low, you will actually end up being placed into the spam folder. Maybe you get blocked by the domain, or you could just end up in a junk folder. Conversely, when you're sending to emails that are good, they're quality, they're engaging, and they're not reporting you as spam because you're doing a great job as a marketer segmenting your list and sending to an engaged audience, your sender score goes up because the ISP is recognizing your due diligence in that regard. And so they prioritize you to being delivered into the inbox versus putting you into a junk folder or spam.
Okay, thanks, Tim, for that. Another question that people might have, what are are there other providers that might be doing this as well, or what are some other ways that, like, for example, Yahoo or some different other providers have done this as well?
Yeah, so if for those of you who've been in the industry for quite some time, you remember back in 2014 through 16 when Yahoo and AOL merged, were bought out, and then they were ultimately bought out by Verizon. Well, this same type of thing happened at that time when that conglomeration was formed and made. They did a big purge, and so during that time frame, it was very important and key and essential to identify all of these types of emails that were being deactivated because ultimately what ended up happening is as marketers did not do their due diligence in identifying emails that were moved inactive, they were reactivated by as spam traps by Yahoo and Verizon, and they were able to do that for the purpose of being able to identify potential spammers. Because spammers, as we all know, they don't care. They just go out, they'll buy a list, and then they'll turn around and just email as much as they can because they have the whole assumption that bigger is better. So it's just really important to get ahead of it and identify these types of emails, know what's coming so that you can suppress them and not email them.
And how often do you think a person should check their lists?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're actively engaged with your list, and this answer does vary on your company, but as a general rule of thumb, if you're very engaged with your audience and you're actively emailing someone either on a weekly or monthly basis, and realistically once a year it would suffice. However, if you have a list that you haven't emailed but once a quarter or once a year, you would always want to clean that list up before you. Of course, I'm going to tell you it'd be great if you did it every day, but as we all know, that's not feasible. And it also doesn't make sense because if you're already actively engaged with sending to these emails, you've cleaned up the list initially, and you've identified the problem emails. And moving forward, you're safe in knowing that you can continue to send to them, and then just doing a quick quarterly or yearly checkup it would suffice. But again, it all depends on what your marketing strategy is, how often you're emailing, and what that would look like. So it would be a case by case scenario.
Okay. And for some people that might be collecting, a lot of people now are collecting emails on a regular basis, either at the point of sale. So, could you talk a little bit about the API?
Oh, absolutely. So our API it will be able to identify emails at the point of sign up so that you can not only determine if the email is valid, but you can also identify in real time whether or not this email is some type of malicious threat. Is it a spam trap or is it a bot? Is it an email address that I should even accept into my database at all? So with that API, we'll provide you back with category flags
so that you can suppress or deny emails or accept them if they are good.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's more and more the case anymore that, you need
Yeah.
to integrate it in regularly. Now, what what about your marketing process? How can you integrate this into your actual marketing process?
On which side? With the API or with?
Just kind of in general, I mean, you can use the API, but what if you're not somebody that uses the API, maybe just your, like, what's a good way to just kind of a general rule of thumb?
Got it. Great question. So uh, with our tool, you're able to actually use our user interface where you can go online, log in, upload a file. It could be either in CSV or TXT format. Uh, Whenever you upload a file, we'll simply provide back the exact same file. We just add 6 columns for you that you can use to sort based on things like duplicates. Were there any emails that had typos in it? The category flag, where we're saying is it valid, invalid, or some type of reputation fraud or delivery threat. And then the last 3 columns are all about that email activity, where you can now sort based on the first seen, you can sort based on trajectory, and then you can also sort based on the most recent activity. So you're able to use all of this information and identify from your original list which emails you want to keep and which ones you potentially want to suppress and not email any further.
All right. And one question we have is there are some marketers saying that if Gmail is now defining engagement as activity in the last 2 years, um, it should be safe to use the same criteria for your organization's engagement activity without impacting deliverability. Would you agree with that?
That's a great question. And it just depends on the metrics that your company decides to leverage and utilize for an actively engaged user. Uh, if someone hasn't responded to an email from you in 2 years and you've been emailing them, do you think that emailing them tomorrow that they're going to magically convert? They could, but it just depends on your business model and what you think is best for your company. Uh, as we all know, someone could decide, you know what, I haven't checked this email in 18 months. I'm going to start checking it now and I'm going to actively start using it. They could convert, but again, at the same time, there is always that possibility that they only used it to check it so that it would remain active. And that was it. But again, I think using your own best judgment, using all the different tools that Webbula can provide, also your own internal metrics that you have would help you formulate the decision on how you want to use or send to that email moving forward.
Great. And if you could just kind of touch upon again, how does everybody know that the check that Webula is doing on this is accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our checks are done in real time. So like I said before, we don't cache any of that data. It's always a real-time check when it comes to the validity or the verification process of that email. Now, when it comes to things like identifying the spam trap or some type of fraudulent activity with that email, that we're able to use our in homegrown technology to leverage that, because if it's a spam trap, it's always going to be a spam trap. It's never not going to be. So that's we're able to confidently back what we're saying, and the emails that we're identifying as a threat is definitely a threat.
All right. Well, that has wrapped up our time here. So I just want to thank everybody for taking part. You should, as long as WebEx is playing well with us, receive a short survey following the webinar. And please let us know how we can improve. I know we had some sound issues today that we'll definitely look into, but hope you all have an awesome day, and thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.